Story 1. I work in information security. That should be reason enough, but here is a good example. My company is very large, with around 150,000 employees in the healthcare sector, so security is tight. We adhere to the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, International Organization for Standardization, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, along with all other relevant standards and governance bodies. We routinely send out fake phishing emails to everyone. Some are poorly crafted, misspelling the company name, containing nothing but a link in gibberish with third-grade grammar, and so on. The links usually lead to a website we host that states, "You clicked on a phishing link. If this were a real phishing attempt, you could have potentially infected our organization, put patient information at risk, cost us millions, and definitely lost your job. Please visit the Human Resources training page and retake the security training program." Sometimes, after clicking, individuals reply to the original phishing email, saying, "I think the web page is broken. Here is my username and password, so I can sign up for the raffle to meet Taylor Swift." One of those individuals was my boss's boss. Story 2. Here's my anecdotal story. I used to work in a bookstore. A woman came in asking about the true story of The Lord of the Rings. I assumed she meant a biography of J.R.R. Tolkien or a book about how the books and movies were made. However, she explained that she was looking for history books about the Middle Ages that discuss elves and dwarves. She was specifically interested in elves because her whole family is tall, and she thinks she might be descended from them. I politely explained to her that the book is fictional and that it refers to Middle-earth, not the Middle Ages. The books are shelved in the fantasy section because they aren't true. She was visibly taken aback and had tears in her eyes as she left the store. I'm not sure if she was sad that it wasn't true or because she wasn't an elf. That person drove to my store. Someone gave her a driver's license, a job, and money. Story 3. There's a tweet from a national park discussing complaints about the difficulty of opening trash cans. It read, "There is considerable overlap between our park's smartest bears and our park's least aware visitors." Story 4. A coworker had maxed out her credit card and didn't know how to use it again. I asked her if she was just making the minimum payment, and she responded, "What payment?" She didn't realize she had to pay back the money she had used on the card and just thought it was free money. Story 5. The few months I worked at one of those fuel centers outside a popular retail chain, I didn't even know there were that many ways to make mistakes in the process of pumping gas, which I thought was pretty simple and straightforward. Almost every day, someone surprised me by doing something wrong in a completely different way. Story 6. Years ago, someone posted a video of water spraying from a sprinkler system. She asked, "What are they putting in our water?" She didn't understand why it created a rainbow. Story 7. Anytime someone tries to board public transport without letting passengers off first, they act indignant when they cannot get on. Story 8. I was working at a dark sky park when a woman asked me if the statues on the self-guided nature hike had radio frequency identification. I said no, and she began expressing how nice it was to find a place where she wasn't exposed to mobile service or power lines because she is allergic to them. They give her migraines, apparently. She needs to be really far away from cell towers or power stations, or she suffers miserably. I didn't have the heart to tell her we were about a quarter mile from a small power station. She just couldn't see it because it was behind the tree line. Story 9. I had a client I was working with. She was in her third pregnancy. We were on our way to a doctor's appointment when, out of nowhere, she said, "I didn't know having sex could get you pregnant until my second baby." I had to fight to control my expressions because I was stunned. Story 10. Whenever people on the internet believe something was intended specifically for them, as though there were only a few dozen people on Earth and their existence matters in every situation and solution. Sometimes this takes the form of a celebrity personally trusting them to lend their money, or believing they won $3 million randomly in a lottery they didn't even enter. Other times, they feel a politician depends on them to share certain content, or they create a connection based on viewing two different websites that is supposed to solve a crime hundreds of people have been investigating for decades. Some ask an AI for assistance on behalf of another user, treating the AI as their own personal secret weapon. This inflated sense of personal importance and exceptionality persists despite their everyday experiences, reminding them of the vast number of people inhabiting the earth. This cannot simply be a survival mechanism, as it does not promote survival. How do people believe they are this important all the time? Story 11. Seeing an influencer promoting turpentine as a natural and trusted way to detox and eliminate parasites, while encouraging people to drink a shot of turpentine every 2 weeks, was shocking. I laughed until I noticed the like count. Over 250,000 likes, thousands of shares, and hundreds of comments expressing that natural is best, and questioning why we ever stopped doing this. I can tell you why. We finally realized that while turpentine is effective for varnishing or as a solvent, it is not safe for ingestion. Story 12. I was working in IT when a man approached me and said the color printer was not producing color copies. I asked to see the original document, and it turned out to be black and white. I then inquired what color he expected to see on the color copy. Story 13. An exercise instructor at the senior center told me she couldn't have an echo device because it emits gamma rays, which she believes contributed to her fibromyalgia. There is so much to unpack here. Story 14. Shortly after September 11th, a coworker from Pakistan stopped by my desk and asked me if I knew what a continent is. I named them for her, and her only response was, "Good. I thought you would know." Then she walked away. I followed up with her later because I was confused about why she had asked me that. It turns out some other coworkers of a similar age had asked her about the Middle East, Iraq, and so on. Those coworkers had to interrupt her explanation to ask what a continent even is. These were people who had young children. It was a failure of our education system and a lack of curiosity on the part of my coworkers. It was disappointing. Story 15. I work in healthcare. One commonly prescribed cough syrup and anti-nausea medication is called Phenergan, with the chemical name promethazine. The number of times a patient or their family member has accused us of giving them meth because it was in the name is far too high. They insisted that the reason they felt sleepy after taking a medication known for causing drowsiness was that we gave them meth. Yes, because meth is known for making people sleepy. Story 16. My hobby is electronics, and I often repair devices for friends. I attended college in San Diego, California, and used to know a wealthy group of friends that I hung out with occasionally. One day, a girl from that group reached out and asked if I did laptop repairs. I said yes, and that I would have some time to look at it in a few days. I went to her house, and the laptop in question was an Apple device. She mentioned that she had thrown her previous laptop away, and this was the replacement they sent, which was also broken. She also said that if I couldn't fix it, I was welcome to keep it. At that time, this model had just come out and was not inexpensive. I suggested we take a look at what was going on before making any decisions. I attempted to turn it on, but it was dead, so I asked for the charging cable. To my surprise, she told me it didn't come with a charger. I insisted it should have. She was adamant that laptops do not need to charge. Apparently, she had gone on a trip and didn't bring a charger with her. Her ex had set up the computer, and it had never been moved or unplugged from its spot on the desk. She assumed it was broken when the battery died. I desperately tried to explain that the laptop needs to charge, just like her phone. She insisted that was incorrect because, obviously, phones and computers are different. In summary, she refused to charge it, gave it to me, and went through 2 more replacement laptops before her father intervened. Story 17. There have been many incidents recently, but the one that stands out the most to me is people actually believing that some schools are providing litter boxes for students who identify as cats. This belief is so strong that legislation is being proposed to ban a practice that isn't actually happening. Story 18. During my time in banking, I flagged an account that made a deposit into an ATM. The check deposited was drawn on the same account. This was an occasional issue because banking regulations require that when someone deposits a check, the first $100 must be available to them. People often did this on weekends when they were short on funds. I had my supervisor come in and instruct me to remove the flag. I was astonished. How could it be anything but a violation? Our account holder, in her early 30s, had a friend who owed her money but had run out of checks. Being the generous person she was, our client said it was fine to borrow one of hers. Yes, she scratched out her name and wrote in her friend's name, and the check was signed by her friend. Someone learned a few lessons in banking that day. Story 19. I used to work at a pizza shop. People would regularly gauge a pizza's size by the number of slices. They wouldn't ask for its diameter. Hello, could you tell me how many times you cut a pizza? That's how I determine how big a pizza is. Story 20. In the Navy, on deployment in the middle of the mid-Atlantic Ocean, we were experiencing some of the roughest seas. The topside of the ship was secured for everyone except the lookouts, who were required to wear life jackets, carry glow sticks, and have man overboard indicators. I was transitioning from my lookout watch at around 3 a.m. when I noticed a Marine who thought it was a good idea to be outside in the dark, curled up in his workout clothes in the corner by the life rails. He did not inform anyone that he was outside and was just one heavy wave away from being reported missing. No one would have known he was gone until the next day. He didn't seem to see a problem with it, claiming that being closer to the waves helped his seasickness. Story 21. Sign in the bathroom warning people not to put their hands in the toilet. This is a public restroom. Story 22. The church my now ex-partner was attending started a collection for a married couple that was having problems conceiving, and they thought it was time to consult a fertility doctor. It turned out this couple in their late 20s was not having sex. When this was discovered, no one at that church thought it was ridiculous. My sexually active girlfriend's reaction was that it could happen to anyone. Story 23. The pandemic made me realize that I used to have trouble suspending disbelief while watching apocalyptic movies or shows. I often thought people aren't that foolish and wouldn't behave in certain ways. I suppose, in a way, I was right. It has actually turned out to be much worse. Story 24. I worked as a temporary employee in a data processing facility that offered seasonal work. It was a hot summer, and the workplace provided cold drinks and frozen treats for us, among other perks. One of the things it organized for the communal break room was 5 or 6 portable plug-in air conditioners. On one sweltering day, I entered the communal break area and was met with a wall of heat. The room was full of people. I estimated about 70 of them, sitting around, eating lunch, chatting, and so on. On this scorching day, all the windows were open because of the heat, and all the portable air conditioners were plugged in and set to maximum power. However, the hot air vents were resting on the floor instead of being hung out of the windows. As a result, when these machines were running at full power, the air in the room was becoming hotter instead of cooler. I received some puzzled looks as I made a point of moving the air conditioner units closer to the windows and hung the hot air vent hoses out. People appeared bemused as I took the time to ensure that the hot air was vented outside while the cold air from the machines circulated in the room. I assure you, there were 70 people in the room who must have thought air conditioning units were magical devices that only produced cold air. They believed that if the room was hot, the units should be turned on at full power and left to operate on their own. By keeping the hot air in the room, they were only making an already hot situation even worse. Story 25. I work in a shop that sells adult products. People sometimes try to return or exchange their used items. There is a warranty for broken products, but we cannot accept returns simply because someone does not like a product. Story 26. 3 instances actually occurred. 1. A woman knocked on my door one day and asked if I could turn off my Wi-Fi for a bit. She was parked in front of my house waiting for someone, and my signal was so strong that it was making her sick. She was enraged when I told her that was not a possibility nor my responsibility. I had seen similar stories online before and thought they were fake. Turns out these people are real. The whole flat earth theory. I thought it was a joke at first, but people truly are this misguided. I work in emergency medical services and public safety. I lost a lot of faith in humanity and people's intelligence during the COVID pandemic. My wife and I, who also works in healthcare, went from being viewed as heroes to being seen as part of a conspiracy aimed at causing harm to everyone. Story 27. It wasn't a single moment. It has been more like watching a slow-motion freeway pileup that keeps accumulating. Story 28. A client tried to purchase a gift card for his wife, and then attempted to use a coupon to obtain the gift card at a lower price. I informed him that we could not do that, but his wife could use the gift card and the coupon together once she booked an appointment. He proceeded to tell me that he had worked in retail for several years. If he had worked in retail, he would know that very few point-of-sale systems physically allow discounts on a gift card. He insisted on speaking with a manager or owner because he thought I was trying to be difficult. The owner was still attending to another client, and the manager was working from home. I called the manager, who confirmed exactly what I had already told him. Frustrated, he took back the coupon and left without making a purchase for his wife. Fast forward about 2 weeks later, he returned with his wife, who was very nice and was making sure he followed through with the purchase without any complications. Some people can be quite difficult, I tell you. Story 29. I attribute this more to 18-year-olds acting like adults for the first time. I was a travel agent when a girl from Kansas called about a Caribbean cruise, typically departing from Florida. She asked me how she was going to get to the cruise. I replied, "Well, typically you'd fly." Then she asked if she had to drive to Florida to catch her flight to Florida. Story 30. I work with traffic lights. When we install a new site, the push buttons are covered with a bag or sticker stating, "Crossing not in use," and temporary crossing lights are put in place. The number of people who press the wrong button and then complain about the lack of clarity regarding which one is functioning has diminished my faith in human intelligence. Story 31. When I see mothers posting about hosting measles parties so all the children can purposely get measles and then become immune, I am alarmed. They believe the measles vaccine is dangerous, so the obvious answer is to intentionally infect their kids with measles. Story 32. There are many porch pirate incidents happening in my neighborhood these days, and I'm baffled because nearly every other house has a security camera system. It is foolish to steal while assuming there is no way to be seen, yet the still images or videos are shared in the neighborhood group. These individuals have no face covering, are easily identifiable, and are often caught on surrounding cameras. Is it a lack of awareness or intelligence? I don't know. I am glad they are not the brightest, as they can be seen and caught. They just look foolish in the process. Story 33. Someone asked why TeamViewer didn't work when their PC is off. I guess some people think PCs are magical. Story 34. Everyone else seems to want to describe foolish individuals who are not like us. My realization was understanding that intelligent, well-meaning people can deceive themselves into acting irrationally if they believe they can do good. It was a public broadcasting service documentary on Nova, or possibly Frontline, about the therapy for autism called facilitated communication. In this method, a therapist gently holds the autistic person's arm, which somehow enables someone who has never learned a single word of English to type messages like, "My father forces me to perform sexual acts on him." A surprising number of cases involved horrific sexual crimes, families were torn apart, and parents were sent to jail. When they finally conducted a double-blind test, they found, unsurprisingly, that no autistic subject ever typed anything but nonsense. It turns out that one of the leading proponents of facilitated communication would warn therapists that they would probably uncover sexual crimes. The only therapist who had the courage to appear in the documentary seemed intelligent and caring. She stated that she actually believed the child was typing the messages but later realized it was her guiding the process all along. I emphasize that she did not seem like an irrational person. She was quite similar to you and me, and if I had an autistic child, I would have trusted her completely. We all know individuals who act foolishly. This documentary made me ponder whether we all can act unwisely if we are motivated enough to override our intelligence. Story 35. The number of people who believe that schools have litter boxes for students who identify as cats is surprising. Story 36. I lived on an island for a few years, and it attracted many tourists during the summer. The only way on or off was a small ferry that ran hourly. I was waiting for my dad, watching people and enjoying ice cream on the docks. The ferry line extended all the way up the hill to the gas station. Clearly too many people to fit on a single trip. The red light turned on, and the ferry worker waved a stop sign and blew a whistle. One driver kept going anyway, mistakenly believing that if they could squeeze their car onto the ferry, they wouldn't have to get off. The person behind them assumed they must know something that the lights, signs, and workers didn't, so they also drove on. Then the next person did the same, and the next. I watched as the ferry, dock, and hill became completely blocked, with no room to move or turn around. They were still stuck when my dad and I walked back home. I wondered how long it took to clear that jam. Story 37. I used to say conspiracy theories were my guilty pleasure. I enjoyed how silly they were, but that was until they became mainstream common knowledge. Those are just supposed to be funny stories for the cover of tabloid magazines, not things we actually believe. I am no longer amused by conspiracy theories. Story 38. I had to explain to multiple adults on separate occasions that hippos are not just female rhinos. Story 39. A gas station attendant is using an oxyacetylene torch to unfreeze the lock on a storage cage filled with propane tanks. Story 40. I was having lunch outside on my break when the accountant storms outside and looks straight up. She then turns to me with a look of pure rage on her face, the kind of look that suggests she could either start crying or start swinging, and exclaims, "Disgusting! Absolutely disgusting. Would you look at that? Ugh." When she sees the utter confusion on my face after looking up at a beautiful summer sky, she says, "Chemical trails, chemical trails." She stares at me for another second, then goes back inside. Story 41. I arrived relatively early. A woman, probably in her 60s at the time, was my Sunday school teacher. She was one of the nicest people you could ever know. When I was about 10 years old, she shared with the class that she had read a newspaper article about Volkswagen-sized bugs invading the southern United States. We were skeptical, so she pulled the newspaper out of her purse. It was the Weekly World News. Story 42. People claim that face masks are ineffective against COVID-19 while simultaneously asserting that they could suffocate individuals. Some are attempting to prove that Ashley Babbitt was unjustly killed during a guided tour of the Capitol by showing a video of her breaking a window to enter a barricaded area guarded by armed personnel. Some people express that they would prefer their child to contract measles rather than receive a vaccination. Story 43. The anti-vaccination movement has gained traction beyond typical superstitious religious types, as I don't believe that people subjected to immense religious conditioning from birth are unintelligent. Story 44. The customer insisted that he purchased the product from our store, although we do not sell it. Took over an hour of arguing, even with his wife on the phone and in person, and he still could not admit it until he actually read the receipt and realized he had bought it from down the street. Story 45. A coworker refused to vaccinate against COVID-19 because of concerns about microchips in the vaccine, even after she had nearly died following 6 weeks in the hospital with the virus. My understanding of average intelligence took a nosedive that day. Story 46. Fourth year at university. I am on the top floor of the library when the fire alarm goes off. I am sure it is just another unwelcome drill, but one must react as if it is not. I head to the nearest visible fire escape, which turns out to be the main stairwell, and begin heading down. By chance, I look down the stairwell and see that a long queue is forming. However, the queue of students is trying to leave through the usual entrance and none of them are heading to the actual fire escape, which is clearly visible and just half a flight of stairs down. It is literally a straight line and a short distance from the entrance on the ground floor of the stairwell to the actual fire escape. What do? I proceed to the fire escape as one is supposed to do. There are at least 40 students in that stairwell, all forming an orderly queue to exit the building the same way they entered, with none of them heading to the fire escape at the bottom of the stairwell, just a few steps further down. To this day, I remember the disapproving looks I received as I passed the line of students, as if I were skipping the queue. I recall some of them turning to their companions and whispering, likely making withering comments about me. I had been looking forward to kicking that fire escape open and shouting, "Get out!" at their confused faces. In a twist of fate, a librarian beat me to it by about 5 seconds and ended up chastising not just the queue of students, but also me as I walked by. When the fire alarm goes off, or if there really is a fire, do not stop thinking and do not just follow what everyone else is doing. That library was full of paper, carpeted floors, and flammable ceiling panels. It would only take one burst of toxic smoke entering that stairwell, and many students could have been found stacked up like cordwood, their exit blocked by those struggling to escape, while an actual fire escape was in plain sight if they had just turned their head to the right or cared to read the sign on the wall that clearly stated fire escape with an arrow pointing in the right direction. Story 47. Watching an adult resorting to bigotry because someone with a disability was trying to get up the stairs with a wheelchair. Story 48. During my freshman year in college, I took an astronomy class. The professor posed a funny question at the end of our final exam, asking how many moons Earth has. One of my friends, after class, was dead serious, saying it was the hardest test ever and asked me what I answered for the last question. I had to reason with her, asking how many moons she saw at night. Story 49. Oh, it's not just a single moment. Rather, I am waiting for the moment that restores my belief in people again. Story 50. All the anti-face mask sentiment during the pandemic is understandable given people's concerns about a new vaccine. However, the notion that face masks represented tyrannical government overreach, especially during a time when we were struggling to contain a respiratory disease largely transmitted through droplet dispersion, was frankly irrational. Story 51. It was when my classmate genuinely thought the moon landing was fake and started arguing with the teacher about it. I was just sitting there thinking, wow, people can be this uninformed? Story 52. I was working as a newspaper reporter, and local company employees were going on strike. I wanted to cover the employees' demands and explain why they were striking. I spoke to the person in charge, and he told me to leave and hung up on me. I then wrote the story from the company's point of view, and the strike ended 3 days after the article was published. Story 53. When an older lady got mad that I didn't know how the youth sweaters for boys that I was hanging up at the skate shop fit, I was a gangly 19-year-old female. I had just received the shipment. Parents also complained that our shoes weren't quality because their teenage sons dragged their heels when they walked and were working on kickflips, which quickly destroys shoes. I kind of miss working at the skate shop. Story 54. I believe the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly increased the spread of science and medical disinformation. It is truly disheartening as a scientist in the field of toxicology. What concerns me most is the widespread belief that the chemicals in sunscreen cause cancer, rather than the ultraviolet rays from the sun. There is nothing you can say to change the minds of those who hold this belief. They heard it from a wellness influencer on social media, so they accept it as truth. Story 55. Back in the early days of COVID-19, people were more concerned about being told what to do and not being able to satisfy their own desires rather than acknowledging that there was a pandemic involved and that we were all trying to stay safe. Seriously, COVID-19 revealed many true colors in people, and I'm glad it did. Story 56. I have shared this before, but I was training a colleague in his mid-20s at work. I was explaining how Anycast works, where we would advertise an IP address from multiple locations, and the traffic would typically go to the closest site. We had data centers in Amsterdam, Singapore, San Jose, and Virginia. So, if the traffic was coming out of Russia, where would it likely go? Well, I haven't traveled very much. I don't know where Russia is. Not understanding, I asked, how about if it was coming out of China? Like I said, I really haven't traveled very much. I don't know where China is. I mean, I have never been to Russia or China, but I can identify them on a map. I just haven't traveled, so I don't know where those are. I pulled up a blank map of continents and said, okay, this is your homework for tonight. You need to be able to name all of the continents by tomorrow. I will give him credit, though. He knew them the next day. Then we started working on countries. Story 57. I got in trouble at a job once because I kept pointing out how everyone picks and chooses which rules to follow. Then, I was fired after telling my supervisor's supervisor that I didn't trust my supervisor due to a conversation I had with her, in which she stated she wouldn't email me the instructions she had just given me verbally for documentation purposes, because she didn't want to incriminate herself. I had many experiences at that workplace that taught me how irrational people could be, and I was made to be the bad guy for being one of the few who were not. I literally cried angry tears in a meeting once because I realized I would always be blamed, as they had already decided I was in the wrong. Then, I was fired over the phone with no explanation. Story 58. I saw a video not too long ago about a killer who raised a significant amount of money to cover relocation and defense expenses. I wondered why anyone would contribute to this cause. Then, a girl at a park in New York said something inappropriate to a child and became wealthy from her bad behavior. What is happening that this is acceptable? Why are online crowdfunding platforms supporting this? Why is bad behavior being rewarded? And who are the people making them wealthy for their lack of humanity? The audacity of some individuals who believe they deserve compensation for the messes they create and the questionable character of those donating and supporting poor behaviors astounds me. I have had many moments before this, but these two incidents made me truly question the judgment of people in the United States these days. Story 59. When I worked in retail, customers would often get upset when their total did not match the sale price listed. They always forgot about tax. Every time. Story 60. I saw a woman get upset at Bath and Body Works because they wouldn't exchange her bottle of Suave shampoo. Story 61. My coworkers and I are experts in our field of study. We often have conversations with family and acquaintances who parrot elaborate misinformation they heard on a podcast or social media, often with great conviction. They don't ask us questions because they believe we are somehow misled. They struggle to answer the most basic questions about the subject. Yet, they choose to believe a podcaster over their own family and refer to it as my data or my truth. Story 62. I was trying to share a fun fact I learned about Australia, so I started with, you know how the seasons in the Southern Hemisphere are opposite from ours? It took me 6 people before I found someone who already knew that. That was not the fun fact. That was just common knowledge, or so I thought. Story 63. People online are sharing AI-generated images as legitimate photographs, even though they should be obviously recognized as artificial to anyone with discernment. Story 64. One time, I was in Rome and stopped by a cafe outside the Pantheon for a bite to eat and some coffee. It was early, so I was the only one in the restaurant at that point. A young woman, about 25 years old, stopped to eat and rushed to ask if anything could be prepared to go. The server declined and suggested she could order something easy to prepare, like a salad, to expedite her meal. The woman agreed, sat down, and asked a series of questions. Can you make a sandwich? Yes. Can I take it to go? No, I already said that. How long will it take? A few minutes. What's a caprese salad? What's arugula? What's mozzarella? How long does it take to cook? The server started huffing at this point. It takes no time to cook. It's a salad. Are you sure it will be fast? Yes, the ingredients just need to be assembled. How long will it take? Under 2 minutes. I'm vegetarian. Is there any meat? No. The exchange lasted over 5 minutes as the server described each of the 3 ingredients in the caprese salad and constantly reassured her that it was quick to make. I was eating a caprese salad, so I tried to interject by showing her what it looked like. The woman kept asking the same questions repeatedly while acting like she would miss the bus. Eventually, the server took her order for the caprese salad, went to the kitchen, returned, and told her she couldn't make the salad because the kitchen wasn't open yet. The young woman perked up and cheerfully said, "Oh, really? No problem," and walked off. I was crying from laughter. I was literally eating a caprese salad right next to her, so obviously the kitchen wasn't closed. I had even shown her the salad moments ago. After she walked off, the server turned to me and said, "I'm sorry, I just couldn't deal with her anymore." Story 65. I had a patient with chronic wounds and skin issues who asked me if washing their skin with bleach would help prevent infections. Story 66. I have had a career in information technology. I suppose the second or third issue I encountered was challenging. I struggle to comprehend how some individuals manage to present themselves given the lack of common sense. Story 67. The pandemic changed everything for me. There were incidents like taking animal dewormer and the president suggesting the ingestion of bleach, along with various conspiracy theories. Story 68. I was donating blood. The nurse asked if I had been out of the country during the 1980s. I told her I had been to Egypt with the military, but had not left the military base. She then asked if I had ever been to Africa. I said, "Only Egypt." She replied, "No, Africa." We went back and forth a couple of times before another nurse intervened and told her that Egypt is a country in Africa. She insisted that Africa was its own country. Story 69. I was in the first wave of several hundred people leaving a concert at a major arena. The entrance and exit consisted of a wall with about 20 doors. The person at the front of the crowd opened one door, and the entire crowd began funneling through that single opening. I was confused and thought that all the other doors might be locked. However, there would be no reason for that. The whole point of having multiple doors is for crowd management. So I stepped out of the crowd, walked over to another door several doors away from the one already opened, and opened it. I looked back as I was leaving and saw that the crowd had split and was now using the two open doors. Remarkably, not one other person among several hundred thought to open a third door. I spent my childhood feeling perplexed by how uninformed the average adult seemed, even though I never considered myself particularly intelligent. That experience as an adult confirmed my suspicion. I'm not particularly clever for opening another door, but it seems that most people act like unthinking herd animals. Life became easier when I began to expect that and decided to interact with others with the same patience and distance I would give to a wild animal. Story 70. Before the internet, I worked in a bookstore. A college student came in and asked for a book called Raft of Mice. I looked it up in the inventory system. Nope. I asked her what class required this title, but she didn't remember. I then asked if she had a syllabus, but no such luck. However, she had written it down and brought her notebook. Great. I looked at the note, which said The Wrath and Many Mice. Aha. I asked if the author was John Steinbeck. Maybe. I explained that while there were no books with any of the three titles she provided, there were two books called The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men, and both were by John Steinbeck. She insisted I was wrong. She left without purchasing the books. 2 hours later, she returned, huffy and rolling her eyes at me when she bought the two Steinbeck books. I rang her up, giving her my best smile. Story 71. Chickenpox parties and measles parties in fundamentalist and evangelical home churches were places in the 1970s and 1980s where people pretended to speak in tongues, which an interpreter claimed was God speaking through the speaker. Passing the collection plate, they said no one should vaccinate their children because vaccines and contact lens solutions caused autism, and that using fluoride did too. They suggested that if people gave them money, they could stop the government officials from forcing public health laws on them. Those of us who didn't object or just got up and walked out were seen as foolish for not joining in, while others continued to spread their ignorance to their children, and now we are dealing with their grandchildren. Cult churches, televangelists, and campus crusaders, take a bow. Well, hallelujah. This is the day their greed and delusions, combined with the people's desire to be deemed worthy while gaining social approval by harming and depriving other people's children, has brought forth. Story 72. I worked at a garden center, and multiple customers would come in asking to have their plants repotted for various reasons, such as wanting a prettier pot or because the plant was outgrowing its pot. I had to inform them that their plants were fake. The first time it happened, I thought I was being pranked. Story 73. Darrell Brooks' trial is another example of this situation. He exhibited a form of stupidity that is not quite diagnosable but is pathological. He drove through a Christmas parade in anger over a relationship issue, killed 6 people, and was apprehended immediately. During his trial, he refused counsel, represented himself, and pleaded not guilty, even though his car, completely wrecked and covered in blood, was found at the scene. His defense involved a lot of sovereign citizen arguments, yet he was not genuinely a sovereign citizen. He seemed intent on irritating the judge and jury by insisting he was not Darrell Brooks, claiming that Darrell Brooks was a legal fiction separate from his physical self. Whenever a witness used the word "you" during their testimony, he would become agitated and ask them whom they were addressing and how they knew that person's name. He displayed a deep-seated misogyny and would insult and interrupt every woman he encountered. He frequently ranted about jury nullification, which is not allowed in court. He received a life sentence without parole. Watching that trial, I was amazed at how different his mental map of the world is. At no point did he recognize that he was in the wrong for murdering 6 people without cause, and he did not appear capable of understanding or responding to the emotions of others. The combination of antisocial personality disorder and profound stupidity is striking to witness, especially when considering that Darrell Brooks is not the only person with that combination of traits. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.